Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, everyone. Sorry I'm late again today. This is supposed to be out on Wednesday. For some of you, it still will be out Wednesday, but Wednesday night, I think. For the rest of you, it's going to be Thursday. It's Thursday for me. Just been a bit busy, so my apologies again. Now, this week, for this edition, I'm going to do sort of the same approach that I did on Sunday when I was talking about Indonesia and BRICS. In that I'm going to take basically one story and sort of talk about multiple dimensions that relate to that story or that are interconnected with that story. So I'm still going to be talking about many different things that are in the news, things that are happening around the world, but relating them all to one story as opposed to doing several different stories. Okay, so let's jump right in. The UK Foreign Office has issued an urgent travel warning for the UAE of all places, including Dubai and Abu Dhabi. The warning advises British nationals to be cautious due to potential threats to their safety. This move comes, of course, after the recent terrorist attacks in Moscow, which the US immediately attributed to ISIS-K, and ISIS-K apparently claimed responsibility for that. But nearly everyone else in the world believes that the attack is the work of American intelligence, which, of course, does not preclude that ISIS-K committed it, as ISIS-K has rather conspicuously only been targeting America's official enemies for quite some time now. Now, the Russians believe that Ukraine was involved, and the United Nations said that they couldn't unequivocally say that Ukraine was not involved. So it's still unclear about that. We know that the attackers were escaping to Ukraine, and that there are ISIS fighters who are in Ukraine also, fighting on the side of the Americans, and they've been there for quite some time. So for anyone who didn't already have this impression, it seems clearer now, after the Moscow attack, it's clearer now that U.S. intelligence does appear to be using so-called jihadi groups like ISIS as destabilization agents, wherever and whenever they believe that that will serve a useful function for American policy or American interests, such as in Iran, in Russia, in the Ukraine, in the Sahel, in Syria, and on and on and on. In the Sahel, for example, the West used so-called jihadi groups to justify their continued military presence in countries like Mali, in Niger, in Burkina Faso, and so on. But now that most of the Western troops have gone, those countries are only becoming more effective in fighting the terrorists. Burkina Faso annihilated 100 so-called jihadis in one day, for example. So yes, it's not particularly ambiguous to most people that these types of groups are essentially Western operatives, acting as a sort of informal American or European version of Russia's Wagner. They're mercenaries, like any other private military contractor, either knowingly or unknowingly, either taking direct instructions or being guided by infiltrators who coordinate with Western intelligence, and Allahu Alam. Now, the attack in Moscow was horrific, and it was filmed, and the videos were distributed all across the internet for maximum delivery of the message being sent. The West, and more specifically America, wherever they cannot engage in formal military operations, will resort to the mobilization of terrorists. The world superpower will engage in asymmetrical warfare any place that they are either unwilling or unable to engage in traditional warfare. That's the new strategy. That's America's new strategy militarily. Of course, it's not actually new, but I would say that this practice is likely to intensify, and it will generally replace standard military operations, in my opinion. So the UK Foreign Office's urgent travel warning about the UAE, encompassing both Dubai and Abu Dhabi, hints to me at how and why the Moscow attack took place, or rather, that multiple purposes were served by that attack. Just like with the American practice of torturing rebels and opposition figures in Latin America and Southeast Asia and Africa and so on, the purpose is to, number one, is to punish and to destabilize, but also to deliver a message to others. This is why they used to drill holes in the heads of detainees in Guatemala and El Salvador and Nicaragua, for example, and why they used to mutilate bodies of the detained in the Philippines and then float their corpses down rivers where people used to draw water and wash their clothes so they'd be sure that villagers would see them. They're sending a message to anyone who is defiant, and that message is unambiguous. If you're defiant, we will terrorize you. This UK cautionary advisory can be interpreted as a response to the UAE's recent actions and challenges to Western interests and to American interests, such as joining BRICS, such as strengthening their ties with Russia and China. The UAE's alignment with non-Western powers has triggered apprehension among traditional Western allies, leading to a re-evaluation of the relationships and strategies that the Western nations have in the region, in the Middle East. As the UAE diversifies its partnerships and asserts its independence in foreign policy, it faces a delicate balancing act between maintaining Western ties and forging these new alliances. This shouldn't be underestimated. The risks and the dangers involved in disconnecting from America's control cannot be underestimated. You know, I talked before about how ADNOC and BP suspended their $2 billion deal to buy a stake in Israel's New Med Energy because of the genocide in Gaza. That deal was aimed to give BP and ADNOC exposure to the vast natural gas reserves in the Eastern Mediterranean, including Israel's Leviathan natural gas field. And just from a business point of view, it would have been crazy for them to go forward with that deal when you will be able to get, you'll be able to negotiate a much more favorable deal a few months from now or a few years from now, because the Israeli economy is taking a nosedive. There's been something like a 20% contraction in their economy. So if they wait until all of the dust settles and the situation is resolved in terms of Gaza, and the Israeli economy is desperate to rebuild itself and revitalize itself and build back better, they're going to have to look to the UAE. They're going to have to look to Saudi Arabia. They're going to have to look to the Gulf to get money to fund their rebuilding. So investors, Arab investors, and foreign investors generally, but in this particular case, we're talking about the UAE. The UAE is going to be able to set the terms for any type of a deal, any type of a negotiation, any type of an agreement that they reach with Israel. So if they were going to invest $2 billion, they might be able to get away with investing just $1 billion now that they've delayed it or they've suspended it. If they resume negotiations on that deal, they'll probably be able to get it for half price. Additionally, the UAE did announce the suspension of the planned land bridge project that would supposed to have connected the UAE to Israel, which again is an example of not only how the UAE and the Gulf generally are pivoting away from the West, but also how they are strategically using the leverage that they acquired through normalization. Because you can't suspend something that you have never initiated. You can't deprive someone of something that you never offered. And you can't take away from someone something that you never gave. Everything that Israel is doing now is making them more and more vulnerable to economic conquest. And personally, I believe that that has always been the plan. It's been the plan all along, as most of you know if you followed my content. Look, the Gulf countries, particularly Saudi Arabia and the UAE, have been investing, for example, in Egypt and other regional infrastructure projects. This is enhancing their influence over regional trade routes. These investments, in my opinion, are part of a broader effort to strengthen their economic ties, improve their connectivity, and most importantly, to establish control over key trading corridors of the whole region. The Gulf countries' investments in Egypt, such as in the Suez Canal Holdings Company, and other infrastructure initiatives, all reflect the UAE's intention to tighten their control over regional ports and trade routes. And not just in the region, to be honest. The UAE manages ports all around the world, starting from China in the east, passing through ports in Europe and Asia, and ending with ports in the United States and Latin America. They're controlling something like 78 of the most important, largest, and most strategic ports on Earth. And so yes, when they joined BRICS, that matters, because BRICS is increasingly operating according to a clearly coordinated bloc mindset and mentality and approach, with a unified plan for not only accelerating the shift of the global economy away from the West, but also for determining how that new economic order is going to be managed and by whom. So let's go even more with this. The Sahel region, as we know, is witnessing a shift in power dynamics, with the UAE and the Gulf Cooperation Council, the GCC countries, increasingly asserting their influence in the Sahel. As Western powers, particularly France, are getting kicked out of the region, non-Western actors like Russia and China and Turkey and the Gulf states are stepping in to fill the void. These new players, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and so on, Russia and China, are engaging in economic, military, and cultural activities. They're challenging the traditional dominance of the West in the Sahel region. The UAE and GCC countries are, in my opinion, strategically positioning themselves to enhance their presence in the Sahel through investments, through agreements, and through diplomatic ties, as Western nations increasingly face challenges and constraints. The UAE is seizing the opportunity to expand their influence and to shape the political landscape of the Sahel, sometimes by means of violence, let's be honest. And they're doing it in collaboration with Russia and with China and with Wagner. The increased engagement of the Gulf states in the Sahel signifies a broader trend of geopolitical realignment and the emergence of a new power dynamic in the region. As the UAE and GCC countries strengthen their presence and their partnerships in the Sahel, they're reshaping the traditional spheres of influence that we've known all of our lives. And they're challenging the established order, and they're positioning themselves as key players in shaping the future of the Sahel, which is also going to help to determine the future of Africa, all while the West is being increasingly marginalized. And as I said, it's not all rainbows and unicorns. They're doing it sometimes by means of violence. And they're positioned, I hate to say this, but it's true, they have connections. They have their own infiltrators in the so-called jihadi groups. So I wouldn't be surprised if they also have more influence. They will be more successful in terms of dealing with the extremist problem, the terrorist problem, the so-called jihadi problem that the countries in the Sahel have been grappling with for years and years now, supposedly being helped by the French. But the French, as I said, it appears to be the case that the French did nothing but hinder their efforts, because now that they're gone, for example, as I said, Burkina Faso was successfully able to annihilate 100 of the terrorists in a single day. Now, the UAE is going to be in a position, particularly the UAE, more than Saudi Arabia, because the UAE has more connections with militias and mercenaries, I believe, than Saudi Arabia does. For example, the RSF, which they are disgracefully, dishonorably, and contemptibly using in Sudan, which, in my opinion, as I've stated many times, they need to completely dislodge themselves and disconnect themselves from the RSF and throw them under the bus and shift their support back to the Sudanese military, to the Sudanese army, and forget this idea of taking over Sudan by means of a coup. But that's another matter. In the Sahel, there's Wagner, and there's the jihadi groups, and of course there is the national militaries of those countries. The UAE will have connections with all of those. They'll have connections with the military. We know that they do. They'll have connections with Wagner. We know they do. And they'll have connections to one degree or another with the jihadi groups and the jihadi elements that are operating in the Sahel region. So they can manipulate that situation to their benefit, either to increase, they can take on the role of the Americans, they can take on the role of the West and actually potentially mobilize those terrorists, or they can help the Malayan and the Nigerian and the Burkina Faso governments to annihilate them. So obviously I pray that they will not utilize those groups for destabilizing purposes, and I don't think that they will, because as I said, they have investments there. They have investments, and they want to have a good relationship. They're taking a new stance, except with regards to Sudan. The UAE seems to be adopting a new stance that is more similar to the stance of MBS, which is that we don't want problems. We don't want more problems. Just as MBS has made sort of détente with Iran, and just as MBS is in negotiations with the Houthis, and they're drawing down the war in Yemen, the approach now seems to be, alhamdulillah, we don't want these kinds of problems. We want harmony, and we want to get along with people. And I think that part of that also stems from the fact that both of those countries have joined BRICS. And I think that MBS already had it in mind that he was going to join BRICS. So some of the steps that he took in the lead up to joining BRICS, I think, are connected to his desire to join BRICS, such as making the agreement with Iran. But the position of BRICS and the approach of BRICS, as I've talked about more than once, is harmony. They want harmony and stability. They don't want these wars. They don't want this instability. They don't want fighting. They don't want violence. They don't want bloodshed. They want stability. And that's being guided, I think, more than anything else, by the general approach, diplomatic approach, and political approach, and approach of foreign relations taken by China. That's their approach. They're the biggest economy in BRICS. They're clearly the most influential economy, and political guidance being offered by China is the most significant in BRICS. So I think that all of the BRICS nations, to one extent or another, are guided by this sort of Chinese philosophy to international relations, and that is affecting even the UAE, which has had, over the last few years, they've had a kind of a fondness, let's be honest, with mercenaries and militants and militias and so forth. And hopefully they're curbing that habit. And as I said, my real prayer on that is that they will throw Dagalo and the RSF under the bus in Sudan and let that country have peace. Because BRICS is very important to the UAE. And the UAE is very important to BRICS. When the UAE joined BRICS, that increased the reach of the UAE. And when the UAE joined BRICS, it increased the reach and power of BRICS as an organization enormously. The entire infrastructure that the UAE, along with Saudi Arabia, though the Saudis are comparatively new in this game, the infrastructure that they've been building over the past few years, their control of ports, their involvement in the Horn of Africa, the Sahel, Egypt, and so on, all of that became assets that can be integrated into the what you can call the grand strategy, the total strategy of BRICS for transitioning the center of the global economy and for taking the global south out of the Western sphere of influence. Now, as I said, a significant portion of the OCGFC are in favor of this, and the smartest among them, in my opinion, have embraced it, and they're actively collaborating with BRICS and with the UAE and with Saudi Arabia so they don't get left behind. The Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Qatar, are positioned to deal with Russia and China in a way that Western-centric OCGFC factions are not able to do. The Arabs can mediate and they can manage the interests of Western OCGFC better than anyone else, and they're the only ones really who can do it. And this has been going well for them so far, and they've built, I think, relatively strong opportunistic partnerships between them. However, as I said, there are the neocons, and they're still around, and they're still dangerous, and they are not on board. They're seeing American power and American influence diminishing. They're seeing it declining, and they don't like it. So in my opinion, again, I think that they are resorting to unleashing terrorist lackeys, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and so on, as well as smaller, even non-religious groups to destabilize and wreak as much havoc and as much chaos as they can. This in and of itself also signals the declining power of the neocons, who previously could have mustered the entire American armed forces to wage war and invasions and occupations and so forth. But now they're reduced to just sending out fanatics and mercenaries. So this warning by the UK about the UAE, to me, is a transparent and somewhat pathetic reprimand by the West against the Emirates because of their joining of BRICS, because of their relations with Russia and China, and because of their defiant actions and their defiant positions, not only with regards to Gaza and with regards to Israel, but many other things. They haven't been very respectful of the U.S., and they have been acting, as I said, with a degree of strategic autonomy. And I think this is a kind of a smack on the wrist or a slap on the wrist against the UAE because of these types of positions and these types of actions and the kind of posture that they've been taking lately. You know, there's never been a terrorist attack in the UAE, and the Emiratis have a deeper intelligence about those types of organizations, terrorist organizations and so on, than the UK does or any other Western nation. So if the West is warning the UAE about a possible terrorist attack, in my opinion, that's self-incrimination, because the UAE does not get information about so-called jihadis from America or from Britain, but America and Britain get that information from the UAE themselves. Noteworthy also is that this warning follows a similar warning alert that was issued in France, claiming that an attack there might be imminent following the Moscow incident. And that, in my opinion, falls under the same general destabilization project that the U.S. has been inflicting on Europe for at least the last 2 years. I would predict that Europe, not the Middle East, will be the main stage of terrorist activity probably over the next decade, perhaps by so-called jihadis, and perhaps by others, nationalists, political extremists, environmental fanatics, and so on. Take your pick. They have plenty radicals to choose from in Europe. Therefore, in my opinion, if something does happen, actually, in the UAE, I would say that the ones who have warned about it will also be the ones who are responsible for it. But personally, I doubt that anything will happen. This warning by the UK seems to me to be a bit like a kid pulling the fire alarm at school in a desperate attempt to avoid a test that he hasn't prepared to take. And Allahu Alam. So that will do it for this week. I hope that it was useful for you, and I hope it was informative for you. And be back again on Sunday, inshallah. Jazakallah Khairan wa assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.